Hello and welcome back to the Beautiful Things channel. Today I'm going to show you how to make one of these fantastic bath towels as expertly modelled by the lovely Isabel here. Now these are really handy for when you come out of the shower. You can simply pop them on and wander around the house, get yourself nice and dry and they're not going to fall down. You can clean your teeth, as you can see here, still with your towel on. You can brush your hair, as you can see, still with your towel on. It's not going anywhere. They're also really handy if you're on the beach. You can pop them on over your swimming costume and get changed underneath it. Just simply slip your cosy down underneath, pop your knickers on, pull them up and get dressed over the top of your towel. So they're great if you've got kids, but they're also brilliant for adults too. And I'm going to show you how to make one today. And I'm going to make one for myself this time. So all you're going to need is a towel. Now, these are nice new towels that I've used, but you can recycle towels. You can use towels you've got at home. And you simply want a towel that is large enough to wrap around you. Now, for Isabel's, I used a bath towel. For mine, I'm going to use a bath sheet. So that's how they kind of come in the UK. These are just supermarket size towels. In fact, these were from Asda's. But if you're in the US, I don't know how your sizes work, but probably you've got obviously a hand towel, then you've got the next size up, and then you've probably got a larger one, like we call them bath sheets, or sometimes pool towels are slightly larger. So this is a bath sheet, so this is the largest towel, and as you can see, if I take it around me so that the length wraps around me and I hold the two ends together, it's kind of me and almost me again, and that's sort of the size that you want. And lengthwise, you can't see this, but this comes down to my calves, so it's a great length for me. Now, the first thing you want to do is to work out if you have a right side or a wrong side to your towel, and you're going to take the length and you're going to bring them together, right sides together, and we are going to clip up all the way down the narrow edge from the top to the bottom of the towel. This towel has like an embroidered edge to it. It's great, this project, because you've got no raw edges. It's all finished for you, so you don't have to worry about finishing your edges. But because this has like a embroidered edge, it's almost like a tape that's on the edge of it. I'm actually going to use that as my seam allowance. Now it's quite big, I'll show you in a minute in detail, but it will just allow the towel to lay a little bit flatter. So let me show you that in more detail. So you can see here there's kind of like, you've got your bound edge of the towel, but then there's like a solid stripe that's a good sort of 1.5 inches, which almost feels like twill tape. It's not the terry toweling fabric, and then the terry toweling fabric starts here. So what I'm actually going to do is use this as my guide, and when I stitch my two edges together, I'm going to stitch along this line, making sure that I do a back tack at the start and at the end. And I'm actually also going to remove my labels from inside just so they don't get in the way. So I'm just going to cut those labels off with my scissors. Random sticker on there as well, and I think there's another one at this end. Oh no, that's just the shopping label. Let's pull that off. Okay. So I've clipped up down my narrow edge. I'm going to stitch from top to bottom with a back tack at either end, which will basically create a big tube. If you don't have one of those wide edges on your towel, that's absolutely fine. You don't have to sew such a large seam allowance. You can just sew a regular 1/4 inch seam allowance or a 5/8 seam allowance. Or if it's got just like twill tape along the edges, you can just sew along the edges of the twill tape. It's up to you. But what you're going to do now is press that seam open. So for me, I've got a really large seam allowance. It's about 2 inches. But that's absolutely fine. I'm just going to leave it be, but I am going to press it open. Next, you want to decide what's going to be the top edge and what's going to be the bottom edge. And the way that I decide that is by how neat my seam allowances are. For instance, on this end, when I open up my seam allowances, I can get them to sit perfectly along the top edge of the towel. So it's really nice and neat. So I'm going to make that my bottom edge so that I know that it's nice and neat. And I'm going to run a line of top stitching all the way around that bottom edge. I'm not going to turn it under or hem it or anything else, but what that will do is just sew my seam allowances open and flat and just secure it in place. And it's just slightly more aesthetically pleasing if you go all the way around your towel. So I've opened up my seam allowance. You can see it's a nice big seam allowance. Yours won't necessarily be as big as mine if you don't have that large twill tape section. And I'm going to come in, and I'm actually going to do this at 5/8. So I'm going to base my towel edge on 5/8 on my machine. I'm going to put my stitch length up to 3, and I'm going to simply top stitch all the way around. Now I've started with these little tabs here so that I can stitch those nice and flat. And yes, you could just sew across that section, but I think it's slightly more aesthetically pleasing to have a row of stitching all the way round. And you can see, if you look closely, that although I'm following the 5/8 marking on my machine, the edge of my presser foot is actually running nicely along the edge of my towel where my binding tape attaches itself to the toweling. So it's going to look like I meant to do it, which of course I did. As you come back to where you started, just do a couple of stitches over your starting stitches to secure it. And obviously I've used a matching thread top and bottom in my machine. You can just trim off any loose ends. So now you've neatened off the bottom edge, you're going to work on the top edge, and that's where we're going to be placing our elastic. You're going to want to turn the top edge of your towel down to the wrong side by enough of a seam allowance that you can insert in your elastic. Now the elastic that I would recommend you use is 3/4 inch elastic. Now let's work out how much we need. It's really quite simple. Take your elastic, pass it around behind you. You can do this yourself if you're doing it for yourself or for somebody else. And you want to put it on your upper bust line or your higher chest, wherever you want the towel to basically sit and hold in place. Pass it all the way around and give it a good stretch. And then hold on to it so that you've got a decent, probably 5/8 seam allowance on your elastic. Now that is really quite tight. You want it to be tight. You don't want it to be loose, because otherwise your towel is going to drop down and you really need to hold in place and keep your dignity. So once you've worked out how much elastic you need and you've got a good 5/8 pinch worth of seam allowance, then you can cut your elastic. Now, oh, ouch. As an example, that piece on me is 27 inches. So that is quite small. Bearing in mind my higher bust measurement, I think, is about 34. So it's quite small. So you do want to put it around the person. And if your child tells you it's too tight, don't be tempted to release it too much. I did that with Isabel's, and when she had then finished her towel, it just fell straight down. But don't worry, we are going to check that it works before we finish sewing. So you've cut your elastic to the length that you need. Now you want to turn the top edge of your towel down to the wrong side. Now to allow enough room for your elastic to sit comfortably in the channel, I would suggest you pull it down by a good 2 inches. And you can fold it down by 2 inches all the way round, and if you want to, you can just pop some clips on the fold just to keep that fold equal. Now I'm just doing this by eye. I'm not going to do anything fancy. It's just a towel at the end of the day. But I'm going to pull it down by about 2 inches. Now you might think that's too much, but by the time you've stitched it and you've inserted that elastic in and it's all ruched up, which it will do, you really do need that amount of room. So from my fold line down, it is 2 inches all the way around that top edge. And I'm making sure that when I get to those seam allowances, they are staying pressed open. Now you're you're going to sew all the way around the top, but you're going to leave a small opening to insert the elastic. Now I would advise you against leaving that opening where your seam allowance is, where your side seam is, because otherwise you're going to be fighting trying to get in and out of that seam allowance with your elastic when you come to feed it in. So I would suggest starting somewhere else around the top edge of your towel and making sure that you leave a gap that's a couple of inches between your start and stop so that you can feed in your elastic in a moment. So you can see my positioning here. I've got the edge of my presser foot, left hand edge of my presser foot running alongside the edge of my fold, which means I've got a good inch or inch and a half here, which is room to thread my elastic into the channel. I'm just starting anywhere around the top of my towel. I'm going to sew all the way around, but I'm going to leave an opening of a couple of inches when I get back to where I started. You do want to be really careful when you sew across your seam allowances because it is quite thick. I have broken a couple of needles in the process of doing this. So just so you're aware, you might find it easier to manually turn the wheel on your sewing machine just over that bulky part, just in case your machine is likely to break a needle. Okay, so once you've sewn all the way around, you can find your hole that you've left in the top and take your piece of elastic that you've cut and measured, pop a safety pin onto the end, and you're going to simply feed it into the slot. Now this is hard work because it's thick toweling. You've actually got a long way to go, so it is tough on the fingers, and you need to be careful that you don't lose this end, because if you do, you are going to have some hard times joining it together. When you hit the seam allowances, just give it a little squidge and keep your safety pin towards the front of your towel, and you should be able to get through there. If you are coming unstuck and you're getting stuck against something, then you need to reverse back because you've gone into your seam allowances instead of the edge of the towel, and it is a bit fiddly to work your way through that part, but it will suddenly go. The bigger the safety pin that you've got, the better. If you've got a big old nappy pin or kilt pin, that's absolutely perfect. A killer on the fingers if you use a small one. Now my trick, you're going to laugh at this, is to take hold of my spare end of elastic and keep it in my teeth. When you get back to the beginning, you want to pull the elastic out, being careful not to lose the other end, and then you want to make sure that it's in the channel and that it's not twisted, otherwise it will be uncomfortable. You can hold on to both ends and just pull it out and make sure that there's no twists in that. And then what I like to do is take both ends of my elastic and I overlap them with a good 5/8 seam allowance, and I actually safety pin them together. That way I can make sure that A, it's not twisted, and B, I can try it on to see whether it fits. But what you don't want to do is lose that safety pin into the channel, so just make sure you've got your thumb on it when you give it a bit of a tug to even the towel out, and then slip it on. And you can make sure then that it doesn't fall down. So I think I can safely say, I've got this inside out, but it doesn't matter. I can safely say that if I was naked, it's not going anywhere. Give it the wiggle test, give it the jiggle test, and then you're good to sew that elastic properly. So get back inside your hole now. Find that safety pin where you safety pinned it all together. Be sure you haven't twisted your elastic where they join. You can then pull it right out, and you're going to set your machine to a zigzag stitch, and you're going to run a couple of rows of zigzag just forward and back, forward and back, forward and back, forward and back over both the raw ends. So we've overlapped that elastic by 5/8. Once you've joined your elastic together with a zigzag, simply give your towel a pull even out that elastic, make sure that it's not all bunched up. And then you're going to go back onto your sewing machine and just sew closed that hole. And what you're going to need to do is stretch the fabric as you sew to make sure that it is sewn flat, and then the elastic will bunch back up again. So my hole is here, as you can see. So I need to stretch my elastic, lift up my presser foot, and I'm going to put my needle down into some of my existing stitching where I sewed to make that channel, and then I'm going to pull on my elastic just to flatten out that fabric, and then I can sew down, still on a zigzag stitch. I can sew down just to close that hole. Once you've closed the gap, then you've just got one last thing you want to do to stop the elastic from bunching up. If you give it a pull out and you work out where your right and your left side is going to be, just run a little line of zigzag stitching just down that casing from the top to the bottom and back again, and that's just going to stop the elastic from moving around inside the channel. And you're done. You have completed your toweling cover up. I hope you've enjoyed this Beautiful Things tutorial. It's been lots of fun making it for you, and I know Izzy and I are going to enjoy our towels for years to come. So thank you very much for watching. I will see you all again soon.